Oh, the sound
Hello.
work. Nice.
Sound work this time. Exciting.
You know what I was just
So,
thinking? I'm so glad that I kept asking you like a dummy and got you to spell it out for me because I'm that kid who was always scared to raise my hand, never wanted to question, didn't get things right away, but once I got them, I got them. So I'm gonna pat myself on the back and thank you for that. That's really gonna change the way I think of the word mindfulness and the practice and everything. So thank you for that, man. That was great.
yeah, no sweat. And based on what you said too, I think the more teaching experience I get, the more I realize that everybody communicates on different language planes. So, like, it's not necessarily about comprehension ability, but like just about the words we use and the meaning we associate with those words. I think John mentioned something about that too on the recent podcast, talking about language and the way that learning, like, so for example, my girlfriend is Chinese, Chinese national, and she lived in China her whole life, and her first language is Chinese. And so when we communicate together, it's really interesting because when I say words in English, they don't mean the same thing to her that they mean to me. And when she says words in Chinese that I think I understand, they don't mean the same thing to me that they mean to her. And so we're
Lost in
talking
translation.
above and underneath these. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah. Maybe I'm just trying to make it deeper than it is. Maybe Bill Murray said it best. I don't know.
Great movie. Great movie.
I love it. Anyway, so altered state versus altered traits. That was a useful distinction for you.
Yeah, it really was, and it makes
Okay.
total sense.
I had so because we had a little break here. I think I'll use this as an opportunity to segue into a question that I wanted to ask you after watching your talk with John. You said that you used to be a big technique guy, focused on very much coaching people through a specific way to do it and not do it, and you said now you don't. If I'm misquoting you, let me know. But you said now you don't like to tell people how to move. You just like to give them tools to empower them to move any way that they really want to move after they leave your sessions and go do whatever practice they want to do. So I wanted to go a little bit deeper into that subject and sort of pick your brain a little bit. So do you think why do you can you talk a little bit about more what you mean by I don't want to tell people how to move?
Yeah, I guess I mean that on a couple different levels. The fundamental physical level is if someone is, let's say they're having a problem doing a pull-up, right? And they're just scaps are elevated, they're in a shrug, and they're just pulling like this, cranking down.
Right.
And then back then I would yell at them and be like, that is a horrible way to pull yourself up, which really they're doing what they can to get the tasks done, right? But I'm saying that's the wrong way to do it. No, you got to bring your shoulders down. You got to have this posture, this technique. And a lot of times we'll have to add a band around their foot so that they can get up and down. But we're not really changing anything. We're letting them get by with the same body, the same joints, the same strength. And, we'd scale it back and then scale it back up, and they might be able to do it one day. But we didn't really change the form, So yelling at them because their body isn't capable of doing something doesn't help, And I think what some of the FRC principles is making sure that they have the freedom and options in that joint to do whatever they want to do. So instead of saying you did this choreographed move wrong and we're going to give you a bad grade because aesthetically it doesn't look how we want it to look.
Okay.
I think giving them the option to do it in any way possible, they'll kind of find the most efficient way to optimize on their own. And if they do
Sure.
do it correctly, they'll be safe doing it. So yeah, that's what I found. I wasn't helping people by being the technique guy and yelling at them and shouting these cues and, you know, throwing a band or foam roller on them until they look how I want them to look.
Yeah.
You know, why are we doing it? What is so important about that exercise? It's almost like trainers, the goal of a trainer for their clients seems to be getting them good at exercise nowadays. That's exercise is just a tool to get them better at a lot more stuff, feeling better, you know. There's not much meaning behind that. Like, who cares how good you are at exercising? Is that really the point? Is that why we're here? So yeah, the technique and the form thing, it has its place, of course, especially in sport or competition. And it doesn't mean I don't give cues at all. I just kind of use more of what they're giving me as feedback to adjust something, or I'll give them external cues. And really, I try to say the least amount possible as far as what they're choosing to express physically when they have a task given to them, because they are trying to do their best at the task, you know?
Sure.
Does
Is that what you, yeah, totally. Is that what you meant when you said like movement shaming? That you don't, you're trying not to create sort of like a good, bad or wrong, right dichotomy for people that shames them into believing they're doing it right or wrong?
Well, yeah, we see that a lot, right, on Instagram. Like,
Yeah.
The red X, don't do it like this, to be here when you push up. Like, my elbow has to be there when I am pushing something away. What if I'm crawling on the ground and it ends up here? Or what if I have to lean and reach for something here? You know, I mean, the stuff you do, you're in this, you know, your elbow might be tucked, you might be in a planche. Like, you can express yourself through the whole range of controlled movement. So why are we saying a part of this range is bad to be in? And I think saying it's bad to go there and fear mongering and telling people that they'll get hurt is going to increase people's chance of getting injured, because they'll never train that area, they'll never train that range, and that's their world of movement is just going to grow smaller and smaller as a result of that. And you know, that's not empowering people, as far as I see.
Yeah. It's something we see a lot of in the yoga discipline as well. There's a lot of dogma about right and wrong ways to do it. For example, one example would be like in lunging positions, where one leg is in front of the other, that you shouldn't bring your front knee in front of your front ankle when doing the position. Never. And so that was one dogma that's been spreading around. I see you smiling there. Yeah, and I mean, it seems funny to us, but for some people, going into a yoga class who don't have any experience with movement principles, it's like, you know, they hear this and they think, oh, okay, well, that's good advice. You know, I didn't know that was harmful for my body. So people are listening to that, and teachers are saying, you know, I think the big problem with the yoga community is that teachers are too charismatic. They're too convincing. They figured out how to be rhetorical, and they figured out how to be, you know, these icons, and people really listen to what they say. And so, you know, they say, don't put your ankle in front of your knee, it's bad, and Jesus will hate you if you do it. And they're like, people are like, okay, well, you know, he must be right, because look at him, he's a sex icon. Oh my God. Like, and that's problematic. That's a really, really problematic paradigm to be in. And so on that front, I agree with you. And I think there's also a risk of going in the other direction, in the direction of chaos, you know, in the, you know, all the way over to the left, where there's no structure at all, and then everyone's just like, you know, no matter what you do is good, and you know, everybody's just a pretty flower and smiling and clouds and unicorns. This is not okay either, because it doesn't give any structure. But that's like a, you know, that's a basic bro dichotomy that I'm drawing there. But
well, no, that's what I was talking about before with the freedom and then the play, the mindfulness and the flow state. You
Sure.
need both. They hold each other up. So yeah, I agree totally.
But where the thoughts that I had on this when I heard you discuss it with John, and when you said like I don't want to tell people what moves to do or how to move, my immediate response to that was like, oh, well, wait, aren't there some techniques and some movements that help people to uncover something or to understand something better? And do we want to and do we want to shy away from teaching people specific, like don't do that movement. Don't do that movement, do this movement instead. Don't do it that way, but instead do it this way. Is that never a useful approach? Or you know, because I think people might be misled in that way.
Oh yeah, of course. You know, when you have an intention behind what you want someone to do, that's where I bring in the external cues. So instead of saying, no elbows in, I'll be like, I want you to reach here. And you reach here. That's an external task to do. It's not something that, it's not an internal form they're trying to mimic. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
one
yeah,
of them,
no.
Yeah. One of them, you're just trying to accomplish a task, and I'm setting in rules and making the parameters for what I want them to do, and they just have to externally try to accomplish that. And it's, you know, it's not pass or fail. You did good. It looked bad. It's like, can you do this? Here's the task or not. I think that's a lot different than telling someone, this is how you do that task, if that makes sense. And I'm philosophically telling you this. I still give form cues and everything. But I really try to shy away from using technique as a technique. I try to show them, I try to push them with rules and external cues toward the technique I want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's a phrasing. It's a difference in phrasing that you were expounding upon there. Okay, I think I understand you now better. So
because you can only do that with an individual. I can't take a snapshot of that cue I'm giving and put it on Instagram and say, knees out when you squat. I could never say that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when we say technique, even when we say a general technique, it still depends on the individual. I don't think you can flat out say it for everyone, because you might need to say the opposite for some people, right? Because really the technique, the things we say over and over, is because we see a pattern of most people going away from a balance, right? So we're trying to bring them back. But there's also the other side. A lot of people have been hurt by good cues because they didn't need them, or they went too far in the direction. So I think we have to be careful about generalizing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so that's a great point. And before I make a counterpoint and play devil's advocate here, I just want to say that any teacher who's listening right now, what DJ just said is really important, because if you are telling people that there is a wrong and a right way to move, in any case, you're probably misleading them, and you're closing off possibilities and opportunities for them to move in new ways and to prepare for movements that they might or might not encounter. Like, for example, if we revisit the example of the knee, don't bring your knee in front of the ankle dogma in the yoga tradition. Not every yoga tradition, so don't be a dick and say like, well, Anusara doesn't say that. Actually, it does, but that's not the point. So let's use that as an example and say like, okay, never bring your knee in front of the ankle. Okay, let's think of everyday movements that you are going to go through in your everyday life, in which you bring your knee in front of your ankle, right? Yeah. For example, fucking walking, going upstairs, going downstairs, squatting, many cases bending over, hip hinging, not always, but in some cases, so these people are just not using their heads, you've got to see that these movements are well, you don't have to, but it would be of a huge benefit to you as a teacher to see that these movements are they're opportunities to prepare yourself for life. But anyway, so that's an agreement with you. Let me play devil's advocate for a minute. So you said it's you don't like to go on Instagram and post like, you know, knees out instead of knees in for everybody, and for squatting, for example. So I wonder if that's the case for everything, and if it's really always an individual thing. Like, is it always entirely individual? Like, for example, let me go into let's use Stalder press. Do you know what Stalder press is in hand balancing? Yeah. So
I've seen it.
let's use that.
Do it.
What's that? Sorry.
I've seen it, but I don't have any personal experience doing it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert either. I'm not an expert hand balancer, but I can do them fairly well. And so I can say that with a Stalder press, there are certain cues and certain techniques that will get you from point A to point B better in almost every case. If you're a human being with scapula and an abdomen and a trunk, and if you have legs, there are certain cues that will get you from point A to point B more efficiently. Like, for example, especially if you're trying to rep them, especially if you're trying to get more than one repetition of a Stalder press in. Let me think of some examples. Okay, so for example, when you're in the bottom position and you're sitting on the floor with your legs spread and you pick yourself up. In this case, scapular protraction and hollow body position in the core, so drawing the ribs back and in, and using your contracting your transverse abdominis, contracting your oblique, contracting your rectus abdominis, contracting all the anterior trunk muscles in the front of your body to pull your ribs back and in, and to push your scapulae wide and forward, is generally a position for almost everybody that is going to, when you start to lean forward and lift your hips, instead of trying to articulate with the pelvis, retract the scapula and contract the low back muscles, we're doing the opposite, is generally going to create a more efficient movement. And if you watch people who do it the other way, and they try to rep it out, and they try to do reps of using their pelvis to articulate the movement by contracting the low back muscles, the erector spinae, to try to lift the pelvis overhead, and they're letting their scapulae fall into retraction during the process, they're letting their ribs flare out, they won't be able to do as many in 99% of the cases. And there are a lot of movements that are this way. And I'm not saying going from point A to point B is the healthiest thing for everybody. But if you are trying to open up possibilities for movement for people, like, you know, maybe not everybody wants to do a Stalder press, or maybe not everybody's body is equipped or ready to do a Stalder press. But if you want to do that and you want to open up that movement option, there are certain things for, 90 to 99% of the cases that will get you from point A to point B more efficiently, or open up the possibility for more repetitions and efficiency. So that's one counter case that I can think of.
What is it counter?
Sorry?
What exactly countering though?
Oh, well, you said well, you said that there are certain, you don't like to give cues for everybody, yeah. And that they don't necessarily apply. That you don't like to give generalized cues to say this is right or this is wrong. So the distinction I'm making is that maybe it's not so useful to say this is right and this is wrong objectively, like in a huge, cosmic, metaphysical sense. This is right and wrong. But I'm saying if we have a clear set of goals, and if we have a clear set of boundaries that, if we have possibilities that we're trying to open up for people, I think there are cues in terms of technique and in terms of practice that are more useful to talk about. Like,
oh, definitely, yeah. There's definitely cues that help people, but so when I said I'm talking about on two different levels. That first level I was talking about, where you're talking about efficiency, because that's really what we mean by these cues. Like, we want you to do it the more efficient way because you'll be better at it and you could do more. Like a squat. What's a squat, you know? Um, Someone's looking at a squat for efficiency, like I want to lift 900. That's different than a resting squat or a squat where you're, you know, trying to bulletproof your hips or do something else. So the intention is, but if we're talking about cues for efficiency, of course, our body certain thing when we want to be efficient. But I'm going to go back to my first example where I used to be the efficiency technique cue guy. That used to be me. And I would find was I was saying the right cues for the person, but it wasn't that they were trying to do, they weren't listening to me. They didn't have the joints of the body capable of doing it. So instead of slamming those cues on them and like, you're not doing that right, because they would keep compensating. And I'm going to put that in air quotes because they were compensating for a good reason. They didn't have a functional body that could perform that task, that external task. So instead of telling them, dude, you just need to elevate more, you know, hollow out, you know, do they even have articulation of those joints and control to make that position? So I would take them out of that task they're trying to do and just give them the options. And when you put them back in, they'll probably figure it out. If not, you give them the cue and they're like, okay, I'm going to go here with it. And it's a different conversation than you're just doing a bad technique. But I agree with you. I mean, those cues are there for a reason. But number one, why is it for efficiency only? That's when we get into sport. And number two, can they execute those cues with their body? Do they have it available to them? So I still think we should be giving cues, of course, and I still think they help people. But those alone are just tools that they may or may not be able to even use. So is it helpful? You know, and I'm talking about myself really. I used to just hand those in and be like, you just are doing it wrong. And I was movement shaming them. And it wasn't their fault, you know. They knew the cues, they knew what they had to do. Just they didn't have the control or the options available in their body to do it. So I'm really yelling at my former self and getting on his back when I say things. So, but yeah, the other is true. You're right as well.
Yeah, my friend Neron here just mentioned something about pain as well. So maybe we can get into the topic of pain in a moment. But I think maybe for those of you teachers who are listening now, or will listen to this chat in the near future, maybe a good takeaway point from both of what DJ and I have just said. And if you think we've disagreed on this topic, maybe you should listen closer. But I think a good point to take away from sort of the morphed message of what we just said is the capacity to make clear distinctions based on context. And so context is key. And to say that something is right or wrong in a general sense ignores context. It dismisses the fact that people are individual, that movements are individual, and different loads, different demands, different positions, but they all require unique understanding of their unique context. Like DJ's point about the squat being a highly variable position is a really good one, because if you're talking about loading a squat with 200 kilograms that's a different squat than a body weight squat, and different techniques will apply. And then you talk about the individual in that squat. That's also going to create a huge number of variables, and this requires a lot of responsibility on the part of the teacher, because now teachers can't just go around saying, you know, this is the right way and this is the wrong way objectively according to God, but they have to take responsibility for the context, and they have to take responsibility for how many potential variables are really possible. How many potential variables are really possible? And they're just huge. But at the same time, they can't just cop out and say like, well, you know, look at this anyway is a good way, because they're all just preparation for life, and they're all just body positions. And so context is key here. So anyway, if you want to take away from that, yeah, please.
One thing, cues are huge. If you're a coach or a instructor, learning cues is one of the biggest things you could offer.
Yeah, for sure.
I had the experience where there was something I was trying to work on and achieve, and I would go to workshops and work with different teachers. And it took one teacher with one cue that made me think of it in a certain way where it clicked for me. So it's more of when you're a teacher, it's a communication with an individual. What we communicate, if you put it on paper for everyone, it doesn't mean anything. If you have to tell someone this is bad, this is right, I want you to do this, this is how we do it, and it works, that's fine. It's a personal relationship, and you're just making sounds in order to produce something, a perception of the movement in their head or an action. So, it's an art, really. That's what coaching is. But yeah, we can't screenshot that and then say, this is it for everyone. But cues are huge. They're magical. We need them.
So maybe if we talk about that in terms of the people who are listening, who are practitioners or just getting started in their practice, if we translate what we just said for you guys, it's being in person with a teacher is super important, because what happens is, like, if you're trying to learn from online, there's a lot of useful information and there's great resources out there for sure, but there's something that you can't get. There's something that you inevitably miss by not being with a teacher who has experience, like DJ's talking about. Like we can, like you're talking about, DJ, just the refined art of cueing. And if you've been with an experienced teacher before, this difference, and there's no question about it. Like some teachers I can name off the top of my head from the yoga discipline who just have phenomenal cueing are David Regelman. Shout out to David. He's just a phenomenal, subtle cuer. And the language he uses to reach people is just really, really potent both on an individual level and a group level. Patrick Creelman in Hong Kong. He's over a long time. He teaches all over, but he's refined his cueing system to a T. And everybody has their different takes and different disagreements about theory, but cueing is one thing that's a hugely important thing that you can't get unless you're in person with a teacher. So if you're looking for practice, seek a teacher to be with in person. If not one-on-one, then at least in a group setting, and look for teachers who have refined their cueing practice. I don't know if so.
Yeah, when you're listening to something on the internet or getting an online cookie cutter program, they're throwing boulders over a wall at you. But when you get with a teacher face to face, they have a knife to your stomach. They're gutting. So it's just way more effective. And it's hit or miss the other way, So you're just being able to touch someone and give them feedback is invaluable. I wish in the future, I hope I can go with some sort of robot body or hologram and like adjust people's bodies. I'm training online because it would be huge. I would stay at home all day then, But touch, being there instantaneously in the moment, feeling what I want you to do is you just can't replicate that anywhere else.
Yeah, and I think that sort of one-on-one experience that you're talking about, how if you could do that, if you could just sort of like reach out in like hologram form to anybody at any time and just one-on-one sort of, knife to the gut, then you would do it. I think that speaks to, I hear that from a lot of experienced teachers, and I feel the same way. And I think there's something missing there. There's something that we should address in terms of culture, and that the one-on-one sort of disciple relationship has been lost somewhere. And I think I think a big mission, and my friend Niron here who commented earlier, before I left the United States, he and I are best friends, and we met in college, and we both studied philosophy. Um, and one thing that we talked about before I left the States was, potentially setting up a sort of mentorship website for men, particularly because men have lost this culture a lot, in terms of having this sort of male bond and master disciple relationship, or developing a website or community for people to go on and find those sort of correct connections, like to find the right teacher and to develop mentor relationships and to work with each other one-on-one, and develop communities around movement through the online platform. So I don't know. I just think there's some work that can be done there to create the opportunities for what you're talking about. Like maybe we won't have holograms in the near future, but there might be some way to bridge that gap and fill that missing piece.
Yeah, we're losing that more and more in the fitness industry, at least. I feel like with just the mass production of maybe it's our instant need for gratification and the YouTube, Instagram generation, where people are going for classes, they're going for numbers, they're going for boot camps, they're going for quick in and outs, and it's more of a group show than a personal relationship. And I think that it's a lot harder for that long-term relationship with a teacher and a student. Of course, you get a lot more out of it, but people want the experience more than that long process nowadays. So I totally agree. I think that would be great if you set some up like that, because we do need that now more than ever.
I think we can learn a lot from the Greeks in that sense. Looking back on ancient Greek culture, and how they used to have that sort of master disciple bond. There's some other stuff going on there that maybe not so useful, but in terms of like the young man, the older man mentorship relationship turning into a sexual thing, maybe not so useful. But
well, when we get the holograms, maybe we could do that.
Yeah. Hopefully, I don't even want to know where it's going to go in the future. I heard a podcast recently with Sam about with Sam Harris talking about they're in the near future they'll have not only robot sex dolls but also child robot sex dolls, and that's fucking disturbing.
Oh,
It's like,
yeah, how can you prevent that?
With technology is just going to spread its fingers into everything, so there's no stopping it. But anyway, my point is that we might
if pedophiles, if we're go be weird with your doll in your basement and not go around actual people, I wonder if that would be a positive release for them where they don't act on it, or if it would just encourage the behavior.
It depends on it depends on what perspective you're looking at it from. I think most maybe cognitive therapists and psychotherapists would agree that if you're encouraging psychopathy, if you're creating a space for psychopathy to thrive and flourish, then probably it will do that, and it will continue to expand. And so encouraging that kind of behavior would probably not be ideal.
Kids playing video games where they're killing people doesn't make them any more likely to murder someone in real life, right?
Yeah,
but I guess sex doll is a lot more intimate and
especially if we're talking robot sex dolls, right? If we're talking things that are meant to seem real. The one distinction that we can make here is we're looking at a movie screen and everybody knows, everybody is aware. Maybe we lose sight of it during the movie at some points, and we become engrossed in the experience, but everybody knows that we're looking at light on a wall, and everybody agrees on that. And then when we leave, maybe some people will have a change in feeling or mood or attitude, but nobody actually thinks that they're Thor. Nobody actually thinks that. Well, I can't speak for you. Anyway, so a little bit off topic. But what I was talking about in terms of No, technology is a fascinating topic, and I'm no expert, so maybe I should best leave that to people who know what they're talking about. Um, but philosophy of technology is just there's so much there to be explored. But ancient Greek culture. So talking about master-disciple relationship, but also the role of movement and learning. So if we look at ancient Greek culture, a lot of their learning took place either in a gymnasium or on wrestling mats or in fighting or in a walking meditation or walking classes. A lot of their classes were in small groups of either just one teacher and one student, or one teacher and a few students walking in a group and discussing something, and the teacher would transmit their information that way, and they would be walking and standing up and interacting with their environment and seeing things as they walk around. And so image association is huge as well, with learning processes. And so, as one thing I wanted to ask you about too, is like how what we're doing here with the movement practice. How do you think? Because there's a revolution that's going to happen here in the current education system, where people go in and they sit at a desk for 7 to 8 hours a day, and they just sit and they passively learn and listen, and they passively read and they passively write, and they're just sitting at a desk. This model won't stand up for long, and they're going to figure out eventually that there are much better ways for people to process information, and maybe that even information is not the best way to teach people either. So in my opinion, this model is going to change, and the only question is when and how and to what extent. So my question to you, DJ, is how do you think what we're doing now, what you're doing specifically, has the potential to inform education practice as it goes forward in our culture?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think we've already figured out it's not the best way to have people sitting for 6 hours in a chair to learn. I mean, our brains were used to move around our environment, navigate our environment first and foremost. And I'm pretty sure movement during reading or anything else, walking, improves memory retention. I know there's studies on that, but as far as what you were saying, not even information, I like that, because I feel like, I mean, how we're doing it in the school system now with Common Core over here in the States, it's like memorize this stuff right here, and then move on to the next stuff. And I don't use hardly anything I learned in school, you know what I mean? Even in college, really. I feel
Anybody out there listening use logarithms anymore? Who's used logarithms since high school? Anybody? No,
yeah, we got calculators. Huh?
Yeah.
So I think, so if you look at how kids naturally learn, it's through playing, right? They play around, explore their environment. They like, people might play house, or they might play hunter-gatherer back in the day, and they were preparing themselves for work, which was really an extension of play. So if we make that same model, where we explore, and it's not so much a pass-fail test, or you have to memorize this, but actually give them a task that they have to complete, and like give them meaning behind it.
Sure.
Then, they'll explore, and I think failing is almost even more valuable in that context. So we'll have a totally different outlook on it if we just let them play. In the play, all we have to do is make the rules of the game and shift it towards the work that we're looking for, or the area we're looking for. So if we as educators can set up the right environment, the right task and rules for them to play, we could give them a good platform to grow.
Yeah, I think that one of the keys you said to what you said there is that we have to set up the structure or the rules or the system of the play so that it facilitates what we're trying to get across. And the problem with that approach is that it takes work, right? It takes an educated teacher, someone who really knows what they're doing, to structure the rules of the game in that way, and to create a dynamic learning context like that. And I can think of maybe, before college, in college I had some more innovative thinkers as teachers. So, but I'm talking public education right now specifically, and I can think of less than maybe two teachers who employed play in their class to facilitate learning. And I think teachers need to be educated first, and it's not an easy education either, and it's not something that a simpleton can do. This is a huge responsibility that we're talking about, and we can't just be trusting anybody with this process, because it takes work to facilitate play in this way. And play. I want to be clear about what I mean by play. I'm not sure exactly what you meant, but I think we probably mean the same thing. Play, not like just haphazardly giggling and having fun, and an aimless game, but serious play. Engaging in a rule-based game that has a competitive element, or that has a progressive rule-based element that is meant for task solving or something like this. I went to John's workshop in Hong Kong, and I've been to other workshops before with many elements of play. John Yuen, if you guys don't know him, check him out. His name is Yuen John on Instagram. YUENJON, right? And so I went to his workshop in Hong Kong, and he introduced some new sort of play and serious play in a way that I hadn't seen before. In terms of we did one for walls, like wall squatting and wall reaching for climbers. We did one for hand balancing on the floor and reaching for objects on the floor with different fixed positions for the hands and the feet. And it was a way of serious play that was highly, highly impactful that I hadn't really seen before. So, hands down to John for using that method. But John is also a highly educated and highly informed teacher who has a lot of experience and is very serious about what he does. He's passionate about it. And so I think, DJ, what you're saying is 100% correct, but it opens up another problem, and that, how do we create an environment and how do we facilitate a culture that creates teachers like this? I don't know. My brain hasn't quite grasped that, how we can approach that yet.
I think if we do have a few great minds who are able to do it, and they can invent the game and the rules and the environment, it can be replicated and people can be trained to teach that, because it's really about the game, and those pick up easily. So yeah, I think just inventing the games, and I'm sure they'll evolve and get better and better. People will be more creative and will find efficiency through that. Oh, you're frozen.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but you're awfully choppy. Yeah.
Are you there, D?
Hello?
I got you now. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, but if we could, so I think the game would be the subject, right? And if it can be done once, I think it'll just be replicated. And, if it works on a group of the population, it'll work everywhere else, I'm sure. If it's an open-ended game. Where we're at now, where we're all the way down to the specific, the information, I need you to memorize this, that doesn't work for everyone. But I feel like that exploratory context will give everyone a chance to learn it on their own in their own way, which you already know. When you figure something out on your own, it sticks with you. It's part of you. But when you're just told something, it doesn't really sink in. You can't really embody that knowledge. So if we could figure out a way for them to discover it on their own, hopefully we could just replicate that and evolve a system of teaching around that. But it's going to take some innovators and some great teachers. Yeah,
that's true.
And I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah, they are. I know they are because I've met them. But I think to bring it back to something I said earlier in the conversation, maybe one of the first things you said, and that is, it's no surprise that people are motivated by sex and being sexy and survival in their movement practice and becoming relevant to their peers, so on and so forth, because that's generally a human motivator. I think if we can employ those motivators in our learning process, then that's gold, you know? Because
That's smart, man. Dude, we should have robot sex dolls, and when you graduate or get a certain score, you're allowed to purchase those sex dolls, you know?
I knew you were going to go there. How did I know that? I shouldn't have brought up the sex dolls. Mistake.
You're on to something, man.
So I think we're almost run out of time on the second session, but I think people are asking for Q&A, so maybe we can just answer a couple questions here and there.
Yeah.
So guys, if you have some questions that you want to ask DJ or me, feel free to shout out, and we'll just go as we get them. Yeah, I hear you, Felipe. I heard you. Yeah. I guess until we get the questions. Oh wait, here's one already. What is both vision? What is both vision? The human side that is more primal, even a bit violent.
What is
Sorry, I don't understand. Do you understand the question, DJ?
Yeah, I think it's what's our take on the primal side of humans, even though it's a bit violent.
Oh. You want to go for it?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I'm sure that's inside all of us. I'm glad we're not killing each other. And it is amazing that we don't kill each other when you think about it sometimes. And that's really thanks to culture and society, right? If we were born in just a tribe of people and we got mashed together with people all over the world, it wouldn't be a good thing. But now that we're all connected and, you know, we have commerce and trade and capitalism and it's a different world. But yeah, I think we're the same animals at the end of the day. We just are running a different cultural operating system, 2.0, whatever you want to say, with some set-in regulations.
Yeah, I think I understand your question, Felipe, and I think it's in relation to yourself. Like, how do I, if I were to rephrase it, it would be like, how do I deal with the experience of having this sort of more primal or violent or, you know, basic human instinct energy in my day-to-day life.
Robot sex dolls. I
think the solution is to go buy a robot.
That's the last time I'm going to say it. I won't say it again. I'm sorry.
You've derailed me again. It's not easy to do. So I think it's a great question because there's a lot of instincts and impulses that culture seems to want to suppress in humans, and so the interest of the collective and the interest of the collective culture is not always, and often, I would even argue, often not in line with individual interest, especially in terms of individual expression of instincts and primal desires. And there's a problem here also with moralism. when a culture becomes too moralized in terms of objective moral values, it ends up suppressing any values or feelings or impulses that are not in line with those moralistic values, and then people get perverted because those impulses are suppressed and not accepted by the collective, and they're even suppressed to the extent that they're physically suppressed. Like people are threatened or thrown in jail, or there's violence against them for expressing certain urges, or at least social violence and physical, if not physical violence, and verbal violence. So it's not an easy question to deal with, but I would say that the answer is never to deny whatever it is you're feeling. Maybe one of the first steps is to develop a practice of simply observing feelings as they arise and acknowledging that they are there without trying to put them in a box or say that they are wrong or right or whether they fit into your culture or not, but simply observe and watch as they come and go. And maybe that might be a simplified answer, and it might not be exactly what you're looking for in this moment, but I think there's a lot of value in that practice of just observing the emotions as they come and go. Because if we can be okay with them ourselves and develop a practice of observing them come and go, then we'll be less reactive and less guilty and shameful about these emotions and feelings and impulses as they come and go in our daily lives, and we'll be less surprised when they're not allowed expression. We'll see that they're not allowed expression, and that way we'll be able to handle it. That's a complicated subject, man. I don't think I can go into it in detail and do it justice here, but it's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, you could also channel that energy into something healthy. Like if you're talking about the primal violence, MMA or something controlled, where you could kind of express that part of you, but use it as alchemy to turn it into something else. Yeah. There's also the problem of yeah, for sure. If it needs to be expressed, there's value in taking on a practice in which you can express it. But I think in most cases, emotions like anger don't really need as much physical expression as we think they do because they're transient. And if we develop a practice of watching them come and go, then we don't always need to react with physical action to our emotions. My first teacher, Baron, and his students who taught me, Baron Baptiste, Baron has an expression, and it's that we are bigger than our feelings, and that's not like a suggestion that we should suppress any feelings that we have, but that feelings are transient experiences in consciousness, so they come and go. And they're one piece of our conscious experience, and they don't need to be always reacted to with physical action. But in some cases, there needs to be some kind of expression. So, like what DJ said, maybe in the case where they need to be expressed, take up martial arts or something like that. I mean, it's a biological thing too.
Right.
I think that's where if you lock someone up in a cage, there's just things you're taking away from them that need stressors or activities they really need. And I think it's hard in the modern society where we're so cut off from how we naturally evolve to move, as one example, and that's why we have all these practices and exercise. It's really just something artificial to supplement something we're missing. So we need these things to as outlets, in a sense, just biologically. As far as emotions, definitely observing them and being aware is crucial. But yeah.
Yeah. So there was another good question here. Thank you, Felipe, for that question, by the way. And there was one here. how do you decide the reach or scope of your teaching? Connecting with one person deeply, teaching workshops in large groups, having 1 million people see your posts on Instagram. So how do we prioritize that, I think is what Jeremy is asking.
You almost have 1 million people on Instagram, so you should get that one.
Holy shit, Jeremy, we only have 2 minutes to answer your question.
In 10
Instagram
words.
said so. What do you think, DJ?
How do you decide the reach scope? It's obviously the larger the group, the more you have to generalize cues and give more conceptual ideas and generalize it. And then you should funnel that into, if you need more help, you're there individually to offer more. So yeah, it's going to get watered down, but that's not a bad thing. You're still reaching people and you give them the option to go further into it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like DJ just said, the technique changes based on the size of the group. So that has to be kept in mind. But in terms of priority for me, like, you know, who do I teach? Small groups, big groups, one person. I like to put I think it's personal for every teacher, and it depends on your style and what you excel at. But for me, I like to put my focus on small groups and one-on-one as well. I don't like teaching big groups. I don't think the information is as potent, and I don't think it reaches people on as deep a level. But you can reach more people that way and open up possibilities for them. So, you know, it's give and take. But for me, it's usually, you know, I put most of my attention in small groups, and some intention, maybe 40% on a one-on-one coaching. But DJ, I think we're out of time, and probably people aren't going to tune in for a whole nother hour. So, what's that?
There's so many more good questions too. I'm reading on here.